Srutakirti, Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Please accept my obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
We're so very happy to be able to have time with you on the Disappearance Day of His Divine Grace 2021. And thank you so much for coming. I think that everybody knows you. You've gone worldwide speaking about Srila Prabhupada. It's a major service in your life, and it's a very, very important service so that we can all learn more about what you might call the person Bhagavat.
Yes.
So we thank you very much. You do have your famous book, What is the Difficulty? Maybe I could just briefly ask you a question. Why did you name the book, What is the Difficulty?
They were the very first words that Srila Prabhupada said to me, which you probably know the story, which it's when I went to get first initiation in Brooklyn, New York on Henry Street in July of 1971. And because I was with Kirtanananda Swami, I got to be right by Prabhupada's Vyasasan, and which for a young boy who was just a kid in New Vrindavan was exceptional. But it was July and the temple room was packed, much like it is in Vrindavan nowadays. Wall-to-wall devotees. And when everyone offered their obeisances, it became more difficult to even find a spot. And I was right to the right of Srila Prabhupada, and I offered obeisances. Everyone was offering obeisances, and I really wanted to see him so much. And I was not very, I offered very fast. I didn't take my time. I wasn't very reverential, I think. So when I completed, I sat up, but I sat on a brahmachari's head behind me, and he pushed me. He pushed my body off of his head, and I literally flew on the Prabhupada's Vyasasan right across his feet. And he yelled. It wasn't a pleasant, he had many ways he would say that. What is the difficulty? This one was a chastisement. He said, what is the difficulty? And I just sank back into my spot. So I started writing years before the book was published, and it was always, we called it Srila Prabhupada Uvacha was the working title. And one morning I woke up and it was like a billboard flashing in front of me. What is the difficulty? So that's an unusual title, I guess. But again, he would say it. We chant, we dance, we take prasadam. What is the difficulty? And as you know, in his readings and lectures, he says that in so many different ways. What is the difficulty, you would say. So, yes.
No, it's a great title. And before you begin to glorify His divine grace on this Disappearance Day, I have one more question.
Thank you.
What caused you? How did you get the idea that you were going to keep very good records, to keep a journal of this? How did you have the presence of mind to do that?
I didn't.
Oh.
I really did. I'm ashamed of myself when I see Hari Sari with 6 volumes, 2 more coming. He kept diaries. He had cassette tapes, which we didn't have when I was Prabhupada's servant. It was a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Reels of tape were like gold to get them. So outside of the U.S., it was difficult to record anything. But what did happen was, just months after Prabhupada left, Satsvarup Maharaj interviewed me in Hawaii for over the course of 3 days. And then he mailed me the transcripts, which were just kept in a drawer somewhere for years, for literally almost 20 years. For 20 years, they were kept there. And it was fortunate that he sent me them because, as you may know, there was a fire there at Gitanagari, and so many transcripts were lost from what he had taken from the different devotees. So it was in 1996, and I was Grahasta, if you can say Grahasta, wife, 3 children. I had my own business. an hour away from any temple. I was living in Philadelphia area, and it was actually Bhakti True Maharaj who developed the idea of bringing all the devotees, Prabhupada's disconnected devotees, back, and it struck a chord with me. And at that time, internet was there, and I saw a group at that time. I don't know, it was a Yahoo group or something, or it might have even been America Online back in those days. And it said Prabhupada Kata, and I got on, but it wasn't Prabhupada Kata. It was devotees fighting on different levels, Ritvik, this, that. So I had letters. When I first became Prabhupada's servant, I had left New Vrindavan, and I used to send letters to Kaladri saying, Prabhupada did this, Prabhupada said that. Any little thing was just wonderful. It was just Prabhupada, just little things he said. And the book started with literally single sentences that I would put on. Brahmachari asked Prabhupada, where is Mount Sumeru? Prabhupada said, it's in the sky. Like, he would give just such funny, amazing answers. Another one was, we heard that when Mahatma Gandhi died, his last words were Ram. Is that right, Prabhupada? He said, I don't know, I wasn't there. So I would just write these things down. So then I started to put them on, and Prabhupada just grabbed me. And all of a sudden, each day I would come back from work. It was an after work thing. And you see the format of my book. It was literally a story. Every day I would write a story when I came home from work. And he just, I was very dried up. And all of a sudden, it's just this ocean began to overwhelm me. So yeah, that's the ability of Srila Prabhupada. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this story. So wonderful.
Thank you.
So you have a talk. We want to listen.
Okay.
We'll begin. We'll be in the background. My dear friend and colleague, Pancharatna Prabhu, will come on at the end to thank you. And let me thank you now for taking the valuable time. And we're all ears to be absorbed in Srila Prabhupada's pastimes. Hare
Thank you.
Krishna.
I really appreciate the opportunity you've given me. Thank you. And I find it's also interesting. I'm here in Vrindavan. As I said, it's 5 p.m. here, so we've been doing so much on Prabhupada's Disappearance Day, and I was thinking how this is where it all began. For Srila Prabhupada, it's where it all began, and it's where he winded up. What do you say? Wind up. It's where he wound up. His pastimes were also here. So I feel, just very, very fortunate. And this title was first Guru Puja, then your puja. Of course, it meant first your Guru Puja, then deity puja. Your puja meant worshiping the deity. And I was just last month, I was there for Prabhupada arriving in Mayapur at the TOVP. Of course, they've been advertising that for many, many months, Prabhupada going to his quarters in the TOVP. So on the very last minute, literally 24 hours before, I talked with Brajavalas, and he was trying to arrange a short Zoom talk. And all of a sudden, he's sending a ticket. And we went there, and I met up with Hari Sari for some time, and we were exchanging stories about Srila Prabhupada. And there was always this common denominator. So I'll start with when I was with Prabhupada, and he first went to Mayapur when I was with him. It was 1973. And at that time, he stayed in a grass hut, literally what now they do the 24-hour kirtan in. It was just a thatched roof, almost like a go down where the cows would stay. And then within a year, by Prabhupada's pushing and encouraging, the Lotus building was there. And it wasn't finished, but Prabhupada immediately wanted to stay in his rooms in the Lotus building. He had a sitting room and his bedroom. And on the end was a bathroom. It was a big bathroom because it was meant for the half of the floor. But that was his bathroom when he was there. But there was no running water. There was no electricity. His room wasn't quite finished, but he wanted to stay in his room. And of course he did. And they made everything, cleaned everything nicely. The bathroom, I would have to bring buckets of water so he could bathe, so he could use the toilet, whatever it was. There was no water there. So I had to manage that. And then that was 74. And then in September of 74, Prabhupada arrives in Vrindavan for what is supposed to be the opening of Krishna Balaram Mandir. Of course, the opening didn't happen until several months later. They were nowhere near ready. And again, Prabhupada, who had rooms at Radha Damodar Temple, wanted to stay in his room, Krishna Balaram Mandir. And the room wasn't finished, but he insisted. And this happens again and again and again. He insisted on staying there. Now, while all this is going on, Surab, who was in charge of all the construction, not just Prabhupada, the guest house was going up, the temple construction was going on. And Prabhupada entered the room, but he had this complaint. And the complaint was he had his bathroom, and it was a Western style toilet, but it had this very funky plastic seat on it. So Prabhupada rang the bell. Ringing the bell, he would ring the bell very often, especially at this time in Vrindavan, and he rang the bell. Get Surabi. So I go and I get Surabi, bring him back. And Prabhupada says, I need a proper toilet seat. You know, he said, I'm an old man. I need to sit down on the toilet. I need a wooden seat. Prabhupada did not like plastic, nothing plastic. So Surab says, yes, Prabhupada. Surab was always very surrendered. He says, we'll get it done. He said, but they literally had to make it from a piece of wood. All the construction is going on. Most everything is by hand, just tick, 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 tick all the time. Tick, 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 24 hours a day. Chipping stone, chipping brick, chipping marble. And now one mystery carpenter, he's going to chip away and make this toilet seat. So he goes off. So the next morning, Prabhupada rings the bell. I go in the room. Where's Surab? So I get Surab. Prabhupada's yelling at him. Where's my toilet seat? Prabhupada, he's working on it. And this went on for over 2 days. Prabhupada would call him in sometimes 3-4 times a day. Where's the seat? Well, the mystery's doing as fast as he can. And it's teak wood. I guess it's hard and has to finish it off, everything nicely. Anyway, finally it got done. But this was my first real understanding of how it didn't matter what else he was doing, getting the temple ready for the opening. Krishna Balaram Mandir, the deities, Radha Shama Sundar, Gaurnitai, Krishna Balaram. Prabhupada would chastise him that he didn't have his seat. So then we go on. And now I'm speaking with Hari Sari, and he tells me about the temple in Hyderabad. Now, this is happening in Janmashtami 1976. So Prabhupada arrives to stay there. Now, of course, all attention is going to the temple. They have to get ready for the Janmashtami opening. So Prabhupada's room is nowhere near done, and they're thinking he'll stay at a life member's house, one devotee house, something like that. Prabhupada says, I want to stay at the temple in my rooms. His rooms covered in dust, marble dust from polishing. There's no doors on the doorways. But Prabhupada's insistent. And then he calls in Mahamsa and he says to him, first you have to get the Guru's place ready. Then you get the temple. So that was the first time I could understand when hearing this, that everything, first it was Prabhupada, his rooms. And he did this there, and he told them, first you have to get my rooms prepared. he was very happy when everything was ready. They had the Brahmins, South Indian Brahmins, prepare everything, do all the mudras, everything, to the deities, had to get the deities prepared. And Prabhupada was pleased. They liked Prabhupada, and Prabhupada liked what they were doing. They gave Prabhupada a bracelet from the kusha grass. They gave him a special ring from the ceremony. And then a day or two later, they went into Prabhupada's room and they presented him with a shalagram shila. And Prabhupada thanked him. He took it, he put it on his desk. And it just sat there for a day or so. And then Prabhupada said to his servant, he said, we can bring this to Juhu. He said in there they can, when they open up the temple there, which he was considering it would get open soon, that they can put the shalagram shila on the altar. And then the next day he's thinking and he calls Pradyumna in. And Pradyumna, we all know, Panditji, Prabhupada's Sanskrit editor from practically the beginning to the end. And he says, Pradyumna, he shows him, he says, I have this shalagram shila. He said, would you like to worship it? And of course, Pradyumna's, yes, Prabhupada, I'll do that. So Prabhupada says, okay, and he explains to him what to do. He says, you take the shila, he said, first you oil it. He said, then you bathe. He said, if you have Ganga water like that, you can bathe it with Ganga water. Then you apply chandan. He said, then you do little artik, offer incense, lamp, flower, and then you give some fruits. He said, then you're finished. He said, for the day, 1 hour. He said, everything finished. Then he tells him about his father. He said his father, he had a shila, and he would keep it in a little silk purse and around his neck. Whenever he would go anywhere, he would have the shila. So Prabhupada tells him all these things. And Pradyumna takes the shila, and he, of course, begins his puja. So after a couple of days, they go to Delhi. And now Prabhupada's in the temple room. All the devotees are there. They're doing Guru Puja. And Prabhupada never misses anything. Prabhupada sees everything. He doesn't see Pradyumna. So he calls his servant. Where's Pradyumna? I think he's in his room, Prabhupada. Get him. So, of course, he goes to his room, and Pradyumna's doing his puja to the shalagram shila. He says, Prabhupada wants you in the temple room. So he comes in the temple room, and that's when Prabhupada said, first you do Guru Puja, then you do your other puja. First you worship the spiritual master. So this was the theme that's going on again and again. You know, I always had this idea when I was with Prabhupada. I knew he didn't like to stay in hotels. I was with him a few times when in Hawaii, he stayed in the Ilakai. When he went to Thailand, he had to stay in a hotel room. Never liked such a thing. And his desire to stay in his room, I thought, was just to that level, just that he wanted to be at the temple. But it was much more than that. Prabhupada understood everything we do went through him. Everything had to go through the spiritual master, our spiritual master. And in his doing it was so that we didn't commit offenses as well. He could have stayed here, could have stayed there, but it was actually an offense. I remember when I was a brahmachari with Srila Prabhupada, I had been with him for about 8 months. And before I was with him, I had been in the temple in New Vrindavan for 1.5 years. So now it was after 2 years. I was wearing saffron. And during massage, before lunch, it was one of the prime times Prabhupada would have his letters read to him, letters incoming. And secretary like Shima Sundar, he would read the letter, and then Prabhupada would dictate a response. And I would be behind Prabhupada. Half the massage was behind Prabhupada, massaging his head, massaging his back. And this one letter came in. It was from a temple president, and he was married. And in this letter, he writes, and he tells Prabhupada in the letter, he wants to get divorced and remarried. And I'm just sitting there massaging. And Prabhupada says, just tell him it's okay. And I'm massaging and I'm thinking, I've been hearing Prabhupada give classes, a few hundred classes now, hearing him speak of morning walks, conversations. And this was definitely not something he ever said was okay. He always said, even you separate, he said, no divorce was there. And of course, I'm just a servant. I don't say anything. Even Prabhupada said, the duty of the servant, you don't speak to the spiritual master unless he speaks first. And I was very much like that. I didn't initiate conversations with Srila Prabhupada. And if he did, it was just wonderful and joyful, thinking that he would even speak to you. But I carried it around the rest of the day. This was 11 o'clock in the morning. And I'm thinking, how could he say that? This isn't the philosophy. This isn't what he's ever spoken. It's not what he's written in his books. It's not what he said in any letter to anyone. So the whole rest of the day, it actually was there in my mind. And I had different ideas, but it was disturbing. So finally, it comes to the evening time. I prepare Prabhupada's evening meal. He would have puris, sabji sometimes, always had his milk sweet and hot milk at night with a little sugar. So then that happens. Then after that, it's around 10 o'clock at night. And I go in the room to massage Prabhupada. At nighttime, the room would be dark, no lights on, whatever light was coming in through a window or through his doorway. And I would sit on the floor, and Prabhupada sometimes would sit up in bed. Sometimes he would even chant on his beads, pull down counter beads. He would chant japa. Other times, most of the time, he would just lie down on his back. And I'm massaging, and I'm going to ask this question. And being with Prabhupada, when I asked the question, I always thought of what the various answers might be. And then I would have my next question, depending on what he said. So it was thought out. So now I'm massaging him, and it doesn't come out right away. It waits. I have to get up the nerve to even ask him a question. So finally, I'm massaging his feet, which means it could end at any time. All massages ended when he said so. You never stopped until he told you to stop. And in the evening, that could also be a little bit, you would be tired. Sometimes 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, Prabhupada would be lying there like he's sleeping. And you're thinking, sometimes you're falling asleep, you're nodding, but you're always just working your hands, rubbing his feet. So finally I said, Prabhupada, today during massage, that devotee asked to get divorced. Before I could get out the entire sentence, and Prabhupada would do that. He would answer your questions. He wouldn't even let you complete a statement. He was already answering your question. And he did it with this. Oh, yes, he said, I told him it was okay. I said, yes, Prabhupada. I said, you say all over and over, divorce is not allowed. And, it's. And Prabhupada said, yes. He said, but in your country, then he went that way. In your country, these things are going on, which that was another answer I thought he might say. So then my next question was, well, that's true, Prabhupada, but also illicit sex, intoxication, meat eating, these are all going on, but they're not allowed. Then Prabhupada's tone changed. And he said, yes. he said, if I tell him not to do it, he said he's going to do it anyway. He said, and then we'll be committing greater offense. And when he said that, it was everything I knew about him, but I couldn't, I wanted to hear him say it, and he said it. It'd be more of an offense. So he just said, yes, okay, it's okay. So then I saw that same pattern, Prabhupada staying here, staying there. He always tried to arrange somehow or other that we didn't commit offenses. I was always committing offenses, but he minimized those offenses. So this was Prabhupada's compassion to all of us, all of the time. And I see that is still there. So then the same thing occurred when Srila Prabhupada finally did go to Juhu. And of course, they weren't expecting him to stay in his room in Juhu. It wasn't at all finished, dirty. Whenever you're working on any project, working on a building project, until it's finished, you see everything everywhere, pieces of wood lying around, stone lying around, dust everywhere. So it was like that in Juhu. And Prabhupada said to them, I'm staying in my room. And when he said he's staying in his room, you don't have time. It's not like I'll come back tomorrow. It means you get it ready. So then all that energy Prabhupada raised would go into getting everything ready for him, because he's first. In our ISKCON society, Prabhupada's always first. Everything comes after that. You can do this, you can do that, you can have so many projects, but first business is Prabhupada. And with this TOVP now, where somehow or other I got to go, I felt actually very happy, because I was the first person to be with Prabhupada in the hut in Mayapur. And then I was the first servant he had in his room in the Lotus building. I got to see that when it was getting ready for Prabhupada, and running around, getting him buckets of water and doing anything he needed. And somehow or other, Prabhupada brought me to Mayapur for when he was going to be transferred from the Lotus building to his room in the TOVP. And they did this so nicely, and it was the same thing. The temple, of course, is a few years away from being able to open up, have a deity installation. But this time, they very wisely put Prabhupada in his room. Hari Sari and we got to do Artik there the next day. Of course, we all did Abhishek in that evening. And I warned them. I said, now you have Prabhupada. It's Prabhupada. Prabhupada's there. Prabhupada's there in his form. Prabhupada's with us. And now he's in his room at the TOVP. And I said, you have to get very serious now, because Prabhupada's managing everything. He's always managing everything. We let him. He takes over. As I said, by miracle, we're here in Vrindavan for almost 2 years now because of a lockdown. We're just tourists. We've had expired tourist visas for over a year, but we've been able to stay based on the fact that travel hasn't been going on. So this whole idea of being here in Vrindavan, today, everything starts. Even the very first Mangal Artik. We have Mangal Artik in the temple room at 4:30, but at 4:10, we're offering Artik to Srila Prabhupada in the Samadhi. When I was with him, I think it was 1973, when they moved ISKCON Press. They moved it to Los Angeles, New Dwarka, where it became BBT. And I remember Rameshwar Prabhu, so many devotees had gone there. They had the graphic design, the artist, every department of printing Prabhupada's books. And they had wonderful space right on Venice Boulevard, place, and it big sign was there, BBT, Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. And the devotees were so happy to show Srila Prabhupada the move that had gone on, this nice place that they had got. So many offices were there, everything was going on. And Prabhupada was standing on the pavement, and he's just looking. And he just chastised. He said, where does it say? He said, Founder Acharya, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada must be there. So the first thing he saw is what they didn't do, to go right back to the very first thing, Prabhupada. So that was, again, a lesson. And he would bring it back to this again and again. If we forgot that person, I just read this morning where he chastised a disciple who wrote him, said, Guru Maharaj. He said, that's Mayavadi. He said, we don't say that. He said, we say their name. He said, when do you ever hear me say that? I say, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. He said, this is personalism. Prabhupada's the most wonderful person. I can say, I'm here at this point in my life, 70 years old. Prabhupada left Vrindavan. He left those little rooms at Radha Damodar Temple. He said his sitting room, not the sitting room, the rooms, he said his rooms at Radha Damodar Temple, he said, are the very center of the spiritual world. In his book, Hayagriva says, the hub of the wheel of the spiritual world. He said are his rooms because the Krishna consciousness movement began there. And of course, he credits Srila Rupa Goswami. Prabhupada never took credit. Of course, we know everything was there. Prabhupada said when he did the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, he translated there in those rooms. And he said he wasn't ever sure that he was going to be completing Bhagavatam, that he was going to be able to do future cantos of the Bhagavatam. He said, I put everything required for one to become Krishna conscious in that first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So everything he did was so carefully thought out. And how he dealt with us was also very carefully done by Srila Prabhupada to see that we could make regular progress in Krishna consciousness. He called it the routine. Prabhupada said the routine. When we would travel, sometimes we would travel to places there was no temple. Once in Australia, we went to Perth, Australia. And we were staying at just like a beach house. Parents of one devotees owned it, and we stayed there. So there was literally Prabhupada, myself, Paramahamsa, his secretary, and 2 brahmacharis were there to help. And when Prabhupada arrived, first thing he said was, what is the program? I think it was Moga Leela or Moga. And he said, well, we're arranging for people to come and speak. You can have people come and speak to you in the evening like that. And Prabhupada's shaking his head. He said, no, what is the program? And Amoga's looking and saying, Prabhupada, what is that? He said, our program, Mangalarti, class. So wherever Prabhupada went, he turned it into the temple. The first trip to Mayapur I took with him, we have that famous place. Mayapur is still a 4-hour drive. 50 years later, it was 4-hour drive then with Prabhupada. It's 4-hour drive now. And there was the mango grove. At that time, there were very young, beautiful mango trees. It was a very beautiful place. And Prabhupada picked that place to stop and have breakfast. We would leave like 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. And as soon as we stopped, we got out of the car, we sat down, and I was very new in every way. I was new as a servant, I was new as a devotee, and made a sitting place. Just 3 or 4 of us with Prabhupada made a sitting place. Prabhupada sat down, and he looked at me, and he said, "You can chant some Sara prayers?" And, but that was the program. Mangalartik, chanting on our beads, morning class. Prabhupada said the routine. When we first arrived in Vrindavan for Kartik, 49 years ago, 1972, in Prabhupada's entourage, there were a few older devotees and was me. So I was getting up in the morning, early in the morning, but sometimes they would get up in time for the morning walk. And this one particular morning, of course, Prabhupada always knew. He would ring his bell, and I would go in. He said, "Where are the others?" I said, "Oh, they're resting, Prabhupada." He said, "Call them." So I called them. We all went in together. I would always go back in. We all went in, sat down, and Prabhupada looked at him. He said, "Why are you sleeping?" Of course, there was never an answer. He would just look at Prabhupada. And he said, "You should rise early." He said, "Take cold bath." And then he said, "Taking a cold bath," he said, "is not an austerity." He said, "It's common sense, good for your health." Ayurvedic principle. He said, "One should rise early, take cold bath at 10 Mangalartik." He said, "Chant your rounds." He said, "And if you do this," he said, "after 12 years, everything you say will be perfect." He said, "All right, go." So then we all left Srila Prabhupada's room. But I saw Prabhupada, what he asked us to do. He was doing it every day chanting. Of course, rose early every morning, rose so very early every morning while everyone else was sleeping. He's doing his translating. Then his morning walk, then class. What always amazed me so much was in the afternoon, he would read his books. I saw him reading his books. It was the very first service I had, reading Krishna book to him when I went to New Dwarka to get Brahmin initiation. And again, because I was with Kirtanananda, I got to go into the garden. And Karandar handed me the Krishna book. The last reader had just left. He said, "When Prabhupada asked, you read Krishna book." The Krishna book, of course, at that time, everyone was reading Krishna book. In 1972, it was 1972. We're all reading Krishna book, learning all about Krishna. But Prabhupada had us read, and he would sit there and just listen. And he was so attentive, enjoying. You could see him as different stories. The first story I happened to pick, it just happened to be about a demon. And I'm reading, and a few devotees beside me, everyone's listening, and Prabhupada handing his bead bag, and he's listening. But when I got to the point where he killed the demon, Prabhupada starts laughing and laughing and laughing. And then his body starts shaking as he's laughing. His belly's shaking, his body's shaking, and his eyes are tearing. And then he starts slapping his knee. We know that in English, right? You call knee slapper. Prabhupada starts slapping his knee, and he's laughing and laughing. So everyone is laughing. But we're laughing watching Prabhupada. The story didn't get the same reaction. I could have just kept reading, but seeing Prabhupada laughing. And at that time, I understood this is Krishna consciousness. This was Srila Prabhupada's mood. Running this big worldwide international organization, organizing so many things, answering so many letters, giving the classes. But Prabhupada was a devotee, and Prabhupada was with Krishna, right? Krishna's entourage. He could tell a story and bring you right in. But even if you're telling the story, he could do the same thing. That was Srila Prabhupada. But the way to that is through him. And in this ISKCON society, everything comes by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. And I've known that. But coming here to Vrindavan and spending the last 2 years here, Prabhupada's home, literally his home is right there. I'll be there, and after this class, we'll be going to Prabhupada's home. We'll do the Artik at 7:20. It's not the most pleasing day, Prabhupada's disappearance. It's a difficult day, but remembering Srila Prabhupada, speaking about Srila Prabhupada is the only way to get some relief of Prabhupada's personal presence. As I said, we know Prabhupada said everything is there in his books. We know that the pure devotee is always there. Vaishnava never dies. But for someone like me, very neophyte, I depended on Prabhupada's personal association so much. But I see now that association, it becomes very personal. Everything we do, every service we do, it's personal to the Guru. I tell many times when I give classes, again, all these things happened in New Dwarka. Coming down the stairs, you all know those stairs from Prabhupada's room. You would go down and go into what we call the old temple room. And the one time he's coming down the stairs and he sees a bead bag hanging on a doorknob. And he looks at me. He said, "Who's left their bead bag crying?" He would say crying on the doorknob. Say, "I'll find out, Prabhupada." And a few days later, the same thing. Coming down the stairs, he sees a plate of prasadam. Oh, Prabhupada looks at me. "Who has left their prasadam crying there on the table?" So he instilled in me, everything is personal. We know everything is Krishna. In that same place, I used to bring him this night jasmine. It's in his garden. At least at that time, it was in his garden. We know after the sun goes down by 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, the fragrance of the jasmine is wonderful. And I would break off a little sprig, so many little jasmine flowers, tiny little flowers. And during evening massage, I'd give him the Prabhupada, and he'd lie there, and he'd just sit them right by his nose. So every breath he took, every breath you take, he would smell, and he would take deep breaths, and I'd be massaging him. Goes, "This is Krishna." In the garden, before I was a servant, just young, knew nothing, Prabhupada could give you Krishna just like that. He could make you understand Krishna, see Krishna, feel Krishna. So he sat there and he looked at us, and we're all young, just young boys sitting in front of him. He said, "What color is Krishna?" And this was the first time. I wasn't his servant, but I thought, he asks interesting questions, funny questions. He must have something up his sleeve. Must be trick question. I learned right away. Prabhupada asked trick questions. So I just sitting there, and one God brother raises his hand, and he says it's described in the Krishna book that he's blackish, like the monsoon cloud. Here in India, you see they're black, dark, dark, dark. In Mayapur, you'll see clouds like nowhere else, very dark. And of course, it was a very good statement. It's right from Krishna book, right from Srimad Bhagavatam. And Prabhupada goes, I saw that shaking of his head so many times. Any question he asked, you gave the wrong answer. He goes, he said, he's blue like the sky. He said, the sky is blue because it's reflecting Krishna's bodily effulgence. He said, that's why the sky is blue. So it's all you have to do is see the sky, remember Krishna. You see Krishna. So this was Srila Prabhupada's way. Everything he did, he always taught very simple, but at the same time very profound. But our business is always to understand Prabhupada's first. Whatever we do, it's going through Srila Prabhupada, it's going through our Guru. And in this way, everything else, he said, everything else will be successful. So he trained us in that way, not always with chastisement, but just instructing what to do in every situation. And if we do that, follow Prabhupada's instructions, we can all be successful in what we do. So I know we have some time left and I can go on talking, but I'd like to open it up if anyone had any questions they'd like to ask or comments about what they've heard. We could do that as well. I've avoided my glasses because too much glare. Let me see. So Pancharatna, you're with me at this time? Hare Krishna.
I'm sorry. I'm here and ready. And I went in and out just a second there.
Yes.
Clicking buttons, So anyhow, we do have some thanks, but we also have a few questions. We have from let me just see if I can put this on here, from Nitya Gopal. Please kindly share your experiences caring for cows. I guess I'm sure in relationship to Srila Prabhupada, and cows. And you also cared for cows, I believe, in New Vrindavan,
I was a city boy from Philadelphia. I can honestly say, before becoming a devotee, I don't think I ever saw a cow, a real live cow, living in the city. And I wound up in New Vrindavan. And I arrived in New Vrindavan at the Bahulaban farm when it was just opening up. Kirtanananda brought about 10 of us there, Kuladri, Katila, myself. Anyway, there were others. And one of the first things they did when getting that farm, of course, were to bring in cows. And one of my first services was milking cows. And it was a learning experience. It was also very physical. There was one point I was milking 6 cows twice a day. So it was very nice. I remember when I became Prabhupada's servant, Kirtanananda was happy that he supplied one of his men to be Prabhupada's servant because he said, I'll have like a hotline to Srila Prabhupada through you. He was very clever. And he did. Actually he did. So he would write me so that I would go direct to Prabhupada. And one of the letters he wrote was about the cows. And he was saying about how, doing Guru Puja, should we, and doing aratik. He said, should we do daily aratik to the cows? So I asked Prabhupada, and Prabhupada laughed. He said, no. He said, it's not necessary. He said, brush them, polish their hooves. Everything was practical with Prabhupada. What do you do an aratik to the cow's looking at you, wondering when you're going to give them a carrot, like
Yes.
give her a carrot, like what is the use of your aratik ceremony? So Prabhupada, everything was common sense. He wrote me once about when you were doing aratik, not to the cows, to the deities, as you were performing aratik to the different parts of the body, he said, this was Kirtanananda Maharaj. He said, what should your meditation be? And Prabhupada just looked. He said, you're doing it to the different parts of the body. He said, that's your meditation. It was just everything was just common sense. He liked common sense a lot, So he said, and if you don't have it, find someone that does. But practical. And that's why I told that story about the divorce thing. Prabhupada was practical. He understood practically how to engage people all the time. And he engaged, I can say myself, I can't speak for others, but, he managed to engage people in all conditions to do monumental amounts of service. He accepted that service. Is what I did also see. When he left, it became very important. He could absorb all your nonsense and engage you in service. But when he left, it became very important to follow his instructions very strictly to keep that connection, Prabhupada. Yeah.
So I have a question.
That's not fair.
Well, you've titled your book, What is the Difficulty? And as you pointed out, this is a phrase that Srila Prabhupada loved to use.
Yes.
And so many times when I hear him say, what is the difficulty? My thought is, Prabhupada, there's a lot of difficulty here. It's me. Over so many years now, what's been your realizations about Srila Prabhupada's intent to just say, what is the difficulty?
One thing, going back to the letters that Prabhupada would get, again, I was with, Shyama Sundar was 10 years older than me when I joined. They were they joined 66, 67. Yes. I joined 71. And they were an older crop, they were college grads, things like that. So most of the people that I got to associate with were older than me. I was just this young. As Shyama Sundar said to me just a few years ago, he said, he laughed. We were talking and he laughed. He said, boy, when you came, you were a blank slate, like it could have told me anything and I'd have done it, and I was just, whatever I can do, whatever service I could do. And I would listen to the letters. Sometimes, there were management letters, how to do this, buildings, buying buildings, so many different things. But also devotees would write with their problems, sometimes their problems. And after a few months, I already knew what Prabhupada was going to say and answer. And the answer was, chant your rounds, read my books, follow the principles. He never gave a material solution to your material problem. He would, we know, you transferring your weight from here to here, you're still carrying the weight. Prabhupada was transcendental. But when you had a problem, he would do whatever he had to do to keep you engaged in devotional service. But what is the difficulty? After I left him, I remember I was with him a long time, 2.5 years. And then Hari Sari became his servant about 6 months later. And then 6 months after that, Prabhupada was in Detroit. And it was the first time I got to see him since being his servant. And I was just like everybody else, after class, Prabhupada had to walk through a hallway and everybody's standing there and I offering obeisances as he went by. I offered obeisances. And of course, I could see his feet right in front of me. He stopped. This was his servant. He stopped. And I got up. And of course, he had that beautiful look. And you could have all kinds of problems. But he would say, is everything okay? And everything was okay because he's standing in front of you and everything just fell away. All your problems that you could have asked them about, they just became insignificant looking at this Vaikuntha person, And I said, yes, Prabhupada, everything is fine. And he looked at me, he said, just chant Hare Krishna, be happy. So that was he was, he was on a different, he was on a different level.
What is the difficulty? Chant
What
Hare
is the
Krishna?
difficulty? Just
And
chant
be
Hare
happy.
Krishna.
So here's a
He was,
question
yes,
from Bhishmadev. What are your primary feelings surrounding your time with Srila Prabhupada? Having progressed in Krishna consciousness over the years, do you ever consider how you would approach things differently in the same opportunity?
Yes, I think most of us oldsters have those regrets, huh?
Yeah.
Pancharatna.
Oh yes. Oh
I
yes.
think I wasted so much time. I could have done so much. As a servant, my business was personal service, catering to everything. Prabhupada said, first class servant knows what to do without being asked. That's what he told me in his room. He called me in. He said, second class servant, you ask him and he does it. Third class servant, you ask him and he does it begrudgingly. He said, or not at all. And I didn't even understand when he was saying things to me at the time when he would talk to me that he was talking to me, because he had such a way of talking as if he was making general statements. And he was doing that specifically with me. He didn't always do that, but with me, he would just talk. And I never realized at the time that he was telling me how to do things, telling me what not to do, telling me what to do. So looking back, I see all that, so many, missed opportunities, so many not understanding instructions that he was giving me, because he knew, just like the devotee who got divorced, if he said something to me that I wasn't ready to do, it was an offense. And I wasn't that type of surrendered soul. I realized just some things you realize 30, 40, 50 years later, and I was even with my wife, married, and I said, whenever I did anything wrong and Prabhupada would chastise me, I never said, I'm sorry. I would have to come up with some way, and it would always turn out okay, but I could never just say I'm sorry, that won't happen again. Like, I learned my lesson. I never did that. I don't, my nature. I don't know why, but that's how it was. And Prabhupada understood my nature, and he worked with me according to my nature. And I was, I was a good personal servant. I was on my toes all the personal servant means attentive. You've got to be attentive to detail. And Prabhupada was very detail oriented. He didn't miss anything. There's stories, and Jamuna tells a story, clean everything from top to bottom. Prabhupada would call summit cleanliness in the deity department. Summit, topmost. And then he would open up his drawer and open up a little box and go like that, to show you missed something. That was Prabhupada. He could always find something how we could improve, but he didn't do it. He did it in a usually very joyful, funny. He could make you laugh at how he knew everything. He knew just where to get you, push you along.
All right.
But
we
for
have to
me,
open ourselves to that.
Yes, one more thing. I would have spent a lot more time learning how to cook things that he liked than I did.
Okay. Well,
okay.
Thank you so much, Srutakirti. We are out of time. We have a packed up day today with different things going on.
Understand.
And you do too.
I also have 14 hours and got another 3 hours to do today. So yes.
Hare Krishna.
So okay.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all of our viewers. Please like, share, subscribe. comment, tell us the good or whatever. If there are problems, just let us know so we can improve. And stay with us. There's more to come today and every day with the GBC SPT channels on Facebook and YouTube, and we pray to serve you and serve the ISKCON of the future today. Hare Krishna.
Oh, can I say one other thing?
Yes, definitely.
Very quickly. Yeah, Gopal Bhatta had asked.
Your book.
To
How to
get my
your book.
They can write to Book Rights Press. That's BOOKWRIGHTS Press.com. And
Okay.
the book in the US is available there.
Okay, Anantashesh, can you just type that in here so it's there?
Yeah.
And we'll put it in the comments as well, so that people can get what is the difficulty. Is that right?
Yes.
Book.
Sorry. Let me see. I think it was book. Yes.
Is it
Book Rights Press? Is that what it says? No, put an S after the T. BookRightsPress.com.
okay? Got it.
Okay.
All right. Haribo. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
You didn't mention about India.